This will sound very strange, but the events on 9/11 in 2001 and the crash of American Airlines Flight 587 into Queens, New York City, a residential neighborhood just after 9/11, and the collision of two vintage World War II planes at the Dallas Air Show in November of 2022, and the last Boeing 747 plane produced on the same day that the Chinese spy balloon first entered the US, and the Great American Eclipse, Warning of Judgment, in 2017, and its path across the country, as well as the path of the spy balloon across the country, from west to east, which hints at Kamala Harris's predicted flight path from west to east, and the collapse of Washington's wall at his Mount Vernon estate after 5.5 inches of rain fell in 1 hour, is all part of a most important, astounding prophecy from the righteous Christian God of the Bible that is predicting that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash on November 7th as she flies across the country from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C. And it is predicted that her crash will be in St. Louis. The date that this video is posted proves that these predictions are being made ahead of time, as does this time-stamped email and forensic notes PDF document. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. Alright, this diagram that you are looking at here is one of the most special diagrams of all. And God's Signs is amazing, and there are so many amazing things that have been produced regarding, for example, the prediction for Harris's plane crash, which is in the bottom right corner here, predicted to be today. In fact, November 7th, 2023. This right here isn't only sentimental for myself. It is sentimental because we go back to 9/11 and the Flight 587 that crashed just 2 months after 9/11 into a residential neighborhood of New York City. And this was at the time that I first came to know that the Bible is true and the God of Israel is the true God. And for all of these years, well, especially the last 7 years since I've been watching for the Lord's Signs, I have been wondering, and also especially since I've known about how it is that Barack Obama will become the president again through the death of Kamala Harris in a plane crash. It has been wondered how Flight 587 would fit into the big picture. It is now known. This was actually known before today. I just didn't get around to producing the video yet. But what was learned today was a second look. I took a second look at the Great American Eclipse judgment sign in 2017. As I'll explain, this is a massive, well, I'm not going to explain completely the sign, but this is massive. But I took a second look and it all has come together. Wait until you hear what I have to say in this video. But first of all, today is November 7th. What I have here on the screen is a website named liveclock.net. And you can see here the clock is ticking. And what it is saying is that it is 7:03 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we know this is Eastern North America time zone and not Eastern China or something, because above it we have GMT, which is the universal time, right? In the UK. And we have it ticking right there. It's noon GMT time, which means it's 5 hours ahead of the East Coast. Right? So, and you saw it just tick. It was 7:03, now it's 7:04 a.m. So it's truly live, all right? But also the emails, or the email that I'll place at the beginning of this video and the forensic notes PDF document also prove, and the post date, well, today's November 7th. But anyway, the email will prove also that this prediction is being made ahead of time. Furthermore, I've known that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash since the autumn of 2020. And that this would be how Barack Obama would become the president again since 2000. In fact, I knew even before the referendum. You know what I'm talking about when I say the referendum, the thing that happened in November of 2020, right? And so I knew even before then that Biden would, I knew the result of the referendum. I knew what it would be, and I knew why it was the President Barack Obama's vice president that would be his old pal, in other words, would make him the president again through him stepping down. All that was known in 2020, including the plane crash for Kamala Harris. However, here we are, November 7th, early in the morning, and I'm finally getting around to what I might call the most profound video of all. It's, in a way, a shame this hasn't been done before today's date, but we have the liveclock.net to prove that this prediction is still being made ahead of time. All right, now, where to begin? Let's begin with 9/11. So on 9/11, Flight 11, with a crew of 11 people, flew into the Twin Towers. It looked like a giant 11. In New York State, the 11th state to join the Union. New York City has 11 letters in its name. All right, and 17 minutes later, the second plane hit the second tower, and it had 56 passengers and 343 New York Fire Department personnel died in the tragedy. Why is all of this important? Well, I'm about to explain this 17.0% connection. This was also finally learned today. I had been wondering for years how we could get a profound connection from 9/11 to Flight 587 and prove that they're both connected. I knew that they were connected because the date 11/12, and I knew this years ago, is a hint at the 11th hour going into the 12th hour. The reason for Flight 11 with a crew of 11 that flew into the Twin Towers looked like a giant 11 in New York State, the 11th state, is because Jesus coined the phrase the 11th hour, which referred to the last hour of daylight before darkness. And in ancient Israel, the 12th hour referred to darkness, and in English, the 11th hour is an idiom that means last chance. Time is running out, as in last chance for the nation to repent and turn back to God before judgment destruction. This was what the 9/11 judgment warning was. It was an 11th hour going into the 12th hour sign, right? And so that's why Flight 587 crashed into Queens, New York. American Airlines, just like Flight 11 was an American Airlines flight. And by the way, the tail of this Flight 11 had an eagle on it swooping. And this is a reference to Deuteronomy chapter 28, when it says that eagles will swoop down on the nation. And the Flight 11 departed from Governor's Island, which in the 20th century was converted into Logan Airport, but was where the first governor, John Winthrop, lived. And he arrived with the Pilgrims in his famous 11-ship flotilla. Furthermore, there were 101, which hints at 11, passengers on the Mayflower that arrived, and they took 66 days to cross the Atlantic, and 66 is the 11th triangular number. All right? And anyway, the number 11 symbolizes God's promises of judgment or blessings and curses in Deuteronomy 28, long story short. And so anyway, that's why, but it was 17 minutes after that the second plane hit. This is very important in the 9/11 symbolism in God's signs. And the reason why the two planes struck the two towers 17 minutes apart is because it was pointing to the two space shuttle disasters that exploded 17 years apart, almost exactly. In fact, just 3 days apart on the calendar. Maybe it's 2 days. It's the 28th of January. So, and the other one was the 1st of February. But anyway, they're commemorated on the same day every year. So they're essentially 17 years apart. And the reason for that is because God is pointing to Apollo 17, the NASA space mission to the moon. Because the moon symbolizes Christ. It is a giant rock. And in the Bible, rock is symbolism for Jesus. And the sun symbolizes God the Father, and the sun's light is too bright for us to gaze at, but we can gaze at the sun's light reflected off of the moon. And this is why watching the timing of the moon is important in the Bible, which is symbolism for watching for the timing of the Lord's return through his prophetic signs, which include moon signs and includes Apollo 17, which was when the last American departed the moon, stepped off of the moon. And that is symbolism for America's departure from Christ, which is why, for example, it was exactly 144 weeks after the first legalization of abortion in America, and on and on. So that's why the 17 minutes. It's a symbolism for America's departure from Christ. That's why the 11th hour going into the 12th hour with the Flight 587 shortly after, which is now realized is 17.0% of a year. That's, in other words, exactly 17% of a year later, after the 17 minutes importance on 9/11. All right, so okay. Now, Flight 587, it crashed into Queens, New York City, and when it crashed, obviously, you could imagine, or maybe you remember, there was a lot of confusion and a lot of anxiety and a lot of worry that there was another terrorist attack involving an airplane. It turned out that it wasn't. It was designed by God and not, well, so was 9/11 for that matter, but the plane crashed due to a malfunction of the plane and not terrorism. But anyway, it sure did get people thinking about 9/11 again. And including myself, who had just come to faith at that time, and a big part of coming to faith was the cross that was found perfectly proportioned, standing upright in the debris field on 9/11. So that's a long story short. That's a personal story anyway. So, but why Flight 587? Well, first of all, on that day when Flight 587 crashed, the New Jersey State Lotto, and that's relevant because New Jersey is essentially New York City, but also the scene of 9/11 was viewed across the Hudson River. The images we can picture in our mind about the Twin Towers are often from the other side in New Jersey. So the New Jersey State Lotto on that day, for the first time ever, held two pick-3 lottos in the same day. The first one, the pick-3 numbers were 587. And this was the day that Flight 587 crashed. The second lotto that day, the numbers were 578. And that is astounding, and that can only be from God, of course. And that is what gets us a hint at this, which is, what is these numbers? What are these numbers all about? Why did the lotto, and by the way, on the anniversary of 9/11, the New York pick-3 was 911. A second witness to the relevance of the pick-3 lottos in New Jersey on this day. So, but why these numbers? And why are they interchangeable? Because the second lotto was 578. So therefore, God is communicating these numbers are important, but not necessarily in their order. So when we times them together, in their precise order as they are, in other words, 587. So we can times them together and we can, mix up the order of the numbers in the multiplication equation, and we still get the same result, which is 280. And the reason for that is because the 280th word in Strong's Hebrew Concordance is the word meaning riddle, enigma. This is a riddle. This is for us to solve the significance of 280. And I'll tell you what the significance is in a minute. Okay, so this is a riddle, and Proverbs 25:2 in the Bible tells us that it is the glory of God to conceal a matter and the honor of kings to search a matter out. In other words, it's essentially, Proverbs 25:2 is essentially saying that God makes riddles, and it's the honor of his servants to figure the matter out. Right? It's the glory of God to conceal a matter and the honor of kings to search a matter out. And so this is a riddle, and that's why this date is exactly 252 months before this date, which was a date that was anticipated ahead of time to be very important. And although I didn't get the correct meaning ahead of time, God is also pointing to the day that President Trump will die. And I thought that this would be it because Trump is from Queens, New York City. And I'm confident, and I don't recall, maybe I've already figured it out and forgot, but no, actually, I don't think so. But I wouldn't be surprised at all. In fact, I would be confident that is the case, that somehow this date will connect to the date it is predicted that President Trump will die, which I believe I know that date, but I'm not going to mention it in this video. I just want to focus on this. So anyway, 252 months is also part of a riddle in itself because it hints at the 2,520 days alluded to in Bible prophecy in the most central prophecy in the Bible, Daniel chapter 9. 2,520 days is 7 biblical years, and a biblical prophetic year is a year made of 12 months with 30 days each. And it's the 70th 7 in that prophecy, and that's part of the reason for the 7 plus 7 plus 7 years, because 252 months is 21 years exactly, which is 7 plus 7 plus 7 years. But more importantly, God uses 3 sets of 7 frequently in his big picture of signs, patterns, and connections. His true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections is only being explained on this channel. And the reason for that is that Joshua led the Israelites around the walls of security of the ancient city of Jericho before they collapsed in God's judgment in a symbolic 3 sets of 7. They marched around once per day for 7 days, and then on the 7th day, they marched 7 times while blowing 7 trumpets. Okay, it was a symbolic 3 sets of 7, and God is communicating the walls of security of America collapsing in God's judgment, which is why, for example, on 9/11, the towers were 110 stories, because Joshua died at the age of 110 in the Bible, and he led the Israelites before the walls of security collapsed. And that's why the towers collapsed. And they engendered an earthquake. And archaeology proves that the walls of Jericho collapsed due to an earthquake. And the earthquake cracked the foundation of Federal Hall on Wall Street, where George Washington was inaugurated, the founding of the nation. And then he walked, or marched, if you will, as in the march around the walls of Jericho, he marched down Wall Street after his inauguration into Trinity Chapel, where he consecrated the nation to God, saying that if the nation were to ever turn away from God, it would lose its divine protection and blessings. That's, of course, a paraphrase. And that is why Trinity Chapel is today known as the Miracle Chapel. It was the only building to have survived the falling debris at Ground Zero on 9/11. And it did so without even a scratch, even a broken window. And it did so because of the uprooted sycamore tree that saved it. Today there's a huge bronze statue, 2-story high, that commemorates the roots of the tree. And anyway, that's because Isaiah chapter 9, verse 11 speaks of the uprooted sycamore trees, which that tree was. It was a 70-year-old sycamore tree, and the collapse of the walls, the collapse of the buildings in Isaiah 9:11. And every 365-day Bible, including for Catholics, it's a standard since the 1980s, every September 11th includes the passage Isaiah 9:11. Because God is pointing to that passage. It's the judgment of warning for ancient Israel. God was warning in that passage that the destruction of the nation would come unless it would repent and turn back to God, and they didn't in that passage as well. So anyway, that's the reason. This is the reason for 56 passengers, because 56 is, if you will, sort of a ultimate 3 sets of 7 number, because it parallels Joshua. It's 7 plus 7 times 7, which is Joshua, 7 days, and then on the 7th day, 7 times while blowing 7 trumpets. So that's why there was 56 passengers on the second plane that crashed into the tower. There was 110 stories, and Joshua died at the age of 110. And the reason for 343 New York City fire department deaths is that 343 is 7 times 7 times 7. Okay, and so that's a second witness confirmation for this connection here, which is this exact 7 plus 7 plus 7 years from this, which is essentially another 9/11 sign because it happened just 17% of a year after 9/11 in the 17 minutes. Okay, so that confirms this. These three sets of 7 here confirm this 3 sets of 7 here. And this is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel, works. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter, as the Bible says is required. And this is what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination, and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. All right, now that we've established all of these amazing second witnesses to what we have here so far, what happened on this date, which again was a date that was predicted to be very significant ahead of time. Many months ahead of time, I knew that something would happen on this date. And what happened is we had a plane crash, a very, very, very prophetic one. This was the day that the vintage World War II planes collided with each other at the Dallas Air Show. Why Dallas? Well, the truth is, the main theme in God's big picture of end times patterns, signs, and connections is judgment warning for the American church, which is symbolized by Dallas, the home of evangelicalism, the Church of Laodicea. Many people, including myself, believe that the 7 churches also symbolize the 7 stages of church history, and the last church, the Church of Laodicea, would most definitely correspond with the American evangelical church that thinks that it is in need of nothing and is lukewarm, and Jesus wants to spit them out of his mouth. Vomit, actually, is the word. And that is because the root of this bad fruit that the evangelical church produces is its bad doctrine, which is taught in Dallas at the seminaries that churn out the nation's pastors. Pastors in themselves are a problem because Jesus forbid preaching for money, which has institutionalized the bad doctrine, which is exactly why Jesus forbid preaching for money. But the whole church has been converted into a polished, monetized endeavor, and with paid preachers, which Jesus forbid. But not only that, they preach the bad doctrine, which is heretical, rooted literally in Gnosticism, because it comes from Augustine, who was a Manichaean official auditor in the Manichaean Gnostic sect for 9 years before joining the Catholic Church. And he corrupted the Western Church with his doctrine, especially in his latter writings, which was picked up by Calvin and Luther in the Reformation. Calvin titled his writings Systematic Augustinianism. He only quoted Augustine and disparaged the other early church fathers that came centuries before Augustine. And Luther was an Augustinian monk. And John, in his epistle, was talking about the Gnostics, and he called them antichrists. And so the descendants of the antichrists that John was referring to is today's evangelical doctrine. And Jesus said he is coming to make war with the sword of his mouth on those that teach and have the works that are a product of this doctrine. And so rather than me go off any further on doctrine, and one of the problems too, by the way, is, and it's rooted in this doctrine, is this belief that you don't need to know about doctrine because you're already quote unquote saved. You know, that's the point here, is that this doctrine produces ultimately complacency and a lack of fear of God. And the belief that people are already past tense saved, but that isn't true at all. And it's very clear, even from the writings of Paul. But the evangelicals isolate a few passages of Paul and interpret the teachings of Jesus through the lens of Paul instead of the other way around. And they ignore countless passages that flatly contradict their doctrine. But anyway, no one is past tense saved. People are on the path to salvation. And one can lose their salvation. One can choose to depart from God of their own free will, right? And anyway, the point is that the false doctrine is Calvinism, which sovereign grace and free grace, which come in the packages of Calvinism and dispensationalism. Both lead to the heretical doctrine of once saved, always saved. Our righteousness is as filthy rags, one verse that Luther took out of context and twisted to support his entire theology. And the myth of imputed righteousness, as evangelicals understand it, and all Christians will be raptured, and on and on. So the point is, though, that the prediction being made in this video will prove everything that I'm saying, and that is the purpose of the prediction. Please make no mistake. The reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove the things that I'm saying, especially the thing that I just said about Dallas and the evangelical church. Otherwise, to not appreciate that is to miss entirely the point of the prediction and the point of this video and video channel. You might as well do something else with your time. If you are still, after the prediction, going to refuse to consider what I am saying. But the most important video, arguably, and the purpose for this video is to point you to that video, especially if you're a Christian, is the 23 church signs video. So make sure you watch the 23 church signs video on his channel, search for it, and watch it. I really do not know what you are thinking, especially if you're a Christian, if after the prediction comes to pass, you do not go watch that video. All right, so the point here too about this air show crash is, of course, that it's hinting at the plane crash of Kamala Harris, through which the Antichrist will return to power. But in the crash, we had the Cobra. The plane's model name is a Cobra P63. Now, 63 hints at 36 the number of the Antichrist in Bible prophecy. Cobra hints at the mark of the Antichrist, because the mark of the Antichrist is the snake bite. And you know what I'm talking about. The thing that you can't talk about. The thing that is a snake bite, that has two prongs, because you take two of them. Okay, and anyway, it is the snake bite. Make sure you watch the snake bite video on this channel. I'll just leave it at that. And again, I'll remind you that the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove the things that I'm saying are fact, true, 100%. It isn't a supposed precursor to the mark of the Antichrist. The commonly held objections that people have based on their knowledge of Bible prophecy, I answer in the snake bite video. But make no mistake, when the prediction comes to pass, you'll know that your held objection based on your knowledge of Bible prophecy is incorrect. That's the point. That's the point, okay? So make sure you watch the snake bite video. The other plane that crashed into the P-63, the Cobra, was the B-17. And again, we have the 17 minutes, right? Between the two plane crashes. These are two planes in this line here too. And 17 plus 63 equals 80. That's part of this riddle. And that's why when we add 80 days, we get this date. This date was also known ahead of time to be something very important, and it was what I call a super date for signs. One of the signs was a plane sign. It was the last Boeing 747 to be produced. Okay, and there was a big ceremony. John Travolta was there, and there's a reason for that. He's a Scientologist, and Scientology is known for aliens, and this is part of the aliens trails of science. But that's not another story, which I'll explain in another video. But that's why 747, because Roswell was on the date 7-4 in 47. And that's why the building number 7 that collapsed on 9/11 had 47 floors. So here we have from 9/11 when building 7, the World Trade Center building 7 with 47 floors collapsed, connecting to the Boeing 747. Furthermore, this connection here, a second witness to that, which I didn't put in the diagram, it's exactly 1,116 weeks. And that's very relevant because that's the word that means Barak in Hebrew. But also, Bama. And Bama means high place. And the planes crashed the towers at a high place. But also, what was high place on this day, right here, 1,116 weeks later, was the Chinese spy balloon crossed into America at a high place. And it crossed over its northern border wall of security, which is the 49th parallel, which is 7 times 7, which hints at the 7 times 7 in the walls of security, the perimeter border wall of security of Jericho collapsing in the book of Joshua. Okay, so it first entered the U.S. on this day, and this was the day that Biden spoke with his military and talked for the first time about shooting it down. But the story about this spy balloon was all about its path across America. The news kept following this story for days, and it was tracking its path across America, and they were waiting for it to cross America before it would exit over the ocean before they would shoot it down for safety reasons. Okay, so in other words, it was all about its path across America. Well, so was the Great American Eclipse. And it also was a path from west to east across America that exit over the Carolinas into the Atlantic, just like this spy balloon did, where it was shot down off the coast of the Carolinas. So this is why this is amazing. Now, before I jump ahead to the Great American Eclipse here, from this date, it is exactly 280 days. And here we have back to the Flight 587, which, as I explained, hints at 280, with the 280th word meaning riddle. And the reason for this here is because it's also equivalent to 40 weeks. And when his disciples asked for the signs to look for of his return, Jesus replied with the metaphor of birth pains. And the average human gestation period, according to the medical profession, is 40 weeks. And so that's why God frequently uses 40 weeks in his signs. They symbolize the birth pains of the end of times before the Lord's return. Okay, and so that's why we have this exact 40 weeks connection here between this plane sign, which connects to this plane sign, which connects to this plane sign, which connects to the planes on 9/11. All right? And we can even take a shortcut because this connects to this date, which connects with 1,116 weeks exactly. And also, the 1,116th word in the Greek concordance is the word Gomorrah. And Gomorrah was destroyed, as will America be. That's what's happening. And it'll be largely due to the Antichrist, who will become the president again after Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash. Now, Kamala Harris is the 49th vice president. So this is why this new discovery here today is amazing beyond words. I didn't realize this before because when I looked at it before, I didn't notice that it's 2,269 days. But if we include the starting date, which God frequently does as equally as often, it's actually 2,270 days, which hints at 227. And once I realized that, it clicked because 227 is the 49th prime number. And that's why it connects exactly to the 49th vice president. And her death in her plane as she flies across the country in a path from west to east. Because it is predicted that she will die in St. Louis as she is flying back from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C. And by the way, I have absolutely zero news about where Kamala Harris is right now. The last news we have from the internet is that she was in the UK on November 2nd, which was last Thursday. So I have no idea where she is right now. But I assume that she, from the UK, flew to Los Angeles to be home for the weekend. And on Tuesday, today, she will be flying back to Washington, D.C. That's what I think has happened. But anyway, it does make sense that her flight will be from west to east. And it was realized in October of 2022 that her death will be in St. Louis. But that realization was before the realization, which came in late December, that St. Louis was actually in the path of the flight from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C. If you look at a map, you can find it online. They draw the map, the flight path for you, and it goes directly over St. Louis. And I didn't know that until months after I already knew for sure that God was saying that through his signs that her plane crash would be in St. Louis. And what's very interesting too is that I visited St. Louis for maybe a month or two, visiting friends, staying with friends. and in 2009. And while I was there, I watched with them the movie Knowing, which is exactly what this video channel is all about. Nicolas Cage, through math, through numbers, is able to predict the exact location and time of a plane crash, which is exactly what's going on in this video. But what's the coincidence is that I watched this movie in St. Louis, and that was the only time that I've been in St. Louis. So anyway, and that was realized after I realized that God was saying through his signs that her plane would crash in St. Louis. I didn't start thinking about St. Louis because of the movie Knowing. And that's just scratching the surface of how the signs line up with my personal life. But that's another story. Well, anyway, the path of totality crossed over St. Louis. The path of the eclipse passed over St. Louis, and it peaked near St. Louis over the area of the country nicknamed Little Egypt, and it peaked over St. Louis at 1:17 p.m. And that's one reason why she will die on the date 11/7 in St. Louis. It will be pointing back to the eclipse, which was the massive judgment warning sign for America. Genesis 1:14 tells us that the lights in the sky are for prophetic signs, and the moon and the sun are the two brightest lights, and this is the only place in the universe that we know of where there are perfect solar eclipses. And that's because of what astronomers call the grand coincidence, which is that the sun is exactly 400 times bigger than the moon and also exactly 400 times further away, which is what engenders perfect solar eclipses. But 400 is very interesting because the last letter in the Hebrew alphabet is there. The letters in the Hebrew alphabet are also numbers, and the last letter, the Tav letter, is 400. It's equivalent to 400, and the letters are also symbols for signs, and the last letter is a symbol for prophetic signs, which is just obviously confirmation. So that, in other words, whoever created the Hebrew alphabet also created eclipses. And also, 400 is symbolism for Egypt. And this eclipse peaked over Little Egypt because the Israelites were persecuted, afflicted for 400 years before the exodus from Egypt and the fleeing from the king of Egypt, which is symbolism for the Antichrist king. That's another reason for this 400 here. Well, 227, shorthand for pi, God's mysterious transcendental number that he has baked into his creation, pi, 3.14. The closest mathematicians can get with shorthand is 22 divided by 7. And so 227 hints at 22 divided by 7. Okay? And it is pi that astronomers use to calculate paths of eclipses. In other words, pi is related to eclipses, and we have this pi embedded in this number from the eclipse to the date it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash in St. Louis, and the eclipse passed over St. Louis at 1:17 p.m., and she will die on the date 11/7, which hints at 1:17 p.m. Also, regarding pi, I'll just add this. In Exodus 3:14, I should say, God told Moses his name after Moses asked him through the burning bush. And God replied that his name is I am. And I am, the symbol for it in Hebrew, is the exact same symbol for pi. And this I am is recorded in Exodus 3:14. And pi is 3.14. All right, now, Washington's tree that he planted that was donated to him by the governor of New York, a very famous tree known as Washington's tree, in his estate in Mount Vernon, fell over in a prophetic storm at the age of 227 years. And that's why Washington comes into all of this, because now we're coming full circle. As I explained at the beginning of this video, through the 9/11 events, God was pointing to George Washington. This is why the eclipse, we have this Washington number here, in other words, and it connects to this. And I just learned this today, so that's why I'm laughing a little bit, because I'm giddy, right? So this eclipse with this Washington connection going forward, but it also connects back to Washington because 5 plus 5 days earlier was the day that 5.5 inches of rain fell in 1 hour, which is unheard of, at Washington's Mount Vernon estate, causing the wall, the retaining wall that Washington had built while he was there on the estate, it caused it to collapse in a mudslide, which was a massive judgment sign for America, of America's walls of security collapsing. And again, as I said, God pointed to Washington's march down Wall Street through the 9/11 events, because the collapse of the towers cracked the foundation of Federal Hall, where he was inaugurated, which symbolized the cracked foundation of America, which is God, America's foundation being in God, being cracked. Okay, and so Washington's wall collapsed due to 5.5 inches of rain, 5 plus 5 days before the Great American Eclipse sign. And the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C. is 555 feet tall and 55.5 feet wide at its base. Okay, so that's amazing. Now, this date here, August 11th, 2017, was exactly 191 months after 9/11. And 191 is a number that God uses in his signs to hint at 9/11. This isn't the only instance by far. So there you have it. This is amazing beyond words. I'm trying to see if I've forgotten anything here. I don't think I have. We're talking about Kamala Harris's predicted path. We have no idea where she is right now. It is 7:41 a.m., but it is predicted that she will be flying from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C. Oh, and that, by the way, that flight path will mirror the Flight 77 on 9/11, which was hijacked and flown into the Pentagon in Virginia. Oh, wow, okay, so here's something else. Okay, but anyway, Flight 77 hints at 11 times 7, which is hinted at with the date. The date 11/7, the date she's predicted to die in a plane crash, hints at 11 times 7 equals 77. And the flight path from Washington, because the Flight 77 was on its way from Washington to Los Angeles. And so her flight path will be the same path as the Flight 77 on 9/11. But I assume she'll be flying to Virginia, because this would make sense, because the Pentagon was in Virginia. And what I just read in the news here is that she and Biden the other day, a few days ago, endorsed at the last minute 23 candidates in the Virginia state legislature election. Okay? 23 is amazing because that's the number that identifies Barack Obama, the basketball president who wore jersey 23 when he played basketball in high school. That's one of many reasons why the number 23 is associated with Obama. Also, he'll return to the White House in 2023. The 23rd president was the presidency that was skipped by Grover Cleveland, the only president to serve non-consecutive terms, just like Barack Obama will, and on and on. The GOAT of basketball, who is also from Chicago, Jordan, wearing 23, MJ, the initials in simple English gematria equal 23, and on and on and on. So anyway, which is explained in many other videos. But the point is here, I'll just summarize one more time here, is that her flight back, it's predicted she will fly from Los Angeles to Washington today, and she will crash on her way, and it'll be in St. Louis, because the flight path passes over St. Louis, just like the path of the totality of the Great American Eclipse passed over St. Louis at 1:17 p.m., which is why she will die today on the date 11/7. And again, the time here on the liveclock.net proves that this prediction is being made ahead of time. Okay, the date that the post of this video proves the date, but this proves the time. And also the email and forensic notes that I'll place, document that I'll place at the beginning of this video will prove this. And if you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I'll just forward it to you so you can know that this prediction has been known for a very long time. Well, not precisely, but just that she would die in a plane crash has been known for a very long time.
All right, as I mentioned, this discovery of this 2,270 days connection was just made today, this morning. And what I almost forgot is that the area code of St. Louis is 314. And I had already known that this was one reason why it is predicted she will die in a plane crash in St. Louis, is because the eclipse passed over St. Louis, and eclipses are calculated with pi, which is 3.14, and the area code of St. Louis is 314. But this connection to the eclipse hints at pi, as I just explained, because 227 hints at 22 divided by 7, which is shorthand for pi for mathematicians. And that is astounding. We have from the day the eclipse passed over St. Louis with the area code 314, and eclipses are calculated with pi, we have this pi connection to the date it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in St. Louis, and the area code 314. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. God became a man and died a horrible death at the hand of the ruler of this world, Satan, and then defeated death for you, so that you too can overcome death, which is the price that must be paid for sin. It is time to repent, which means to change one's ways and turn to God and become a disciple of Jesus. Please leave a like and upvote the video. And once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more. Don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, TrumpPrediction.com. If you are watching this on the YouTube platform, please note that not all of the videos are on YouTube. You need to switch to the BitChute.com or the Odyssey.com channel. And do it now in case you aren't able to later.